Hey everybody, it's time for another Rahdo Rules run-through with Ryan, and today we've got Genotype. Ryan, take us to class.
Thanks, Rahdo. Hi, it's Ryan from Knights Around the Table, and this is Genotype, a Mendelian genetics game, a worker placement dice drafting game for 1 to 5 players. Genotype is based on the research of an Augustinian friar named Gregor Mendel. By crossbreeding his pea plants, Mendel discovered that certain character traits were passed down through the generations, like my curly hair, or my dismaying inability to play sports. Genius Games has asked me to teach you how to play, so let's get into it. You and your friends play research assistants to Gregor Mendel, helping him breed his pea plants and confirm different traits that pass down from parents to their children. You'll grow pea plants in your little garden and check off their different characteristics by drafting dice from a common pool. You can use special tools to get an advantage over your rival researchers, or spend money on various upgrades to edge out your competition. You can also claim research grants that score big points for your discoveries at the end of the game. At the end of 5 rounds of play, whoever has earned the most points by researching their pea plants wins. Round Anatomy. The game takes place over 5 rounds, and each round is split into 3 phases. In Phase 1, you jockey for position and get ready for the dice draft. Phase 2 is the dice draft, where the players roll a bunch of dice and then take turns choosing the dice that will let them check off traits on their pea plants. And in Phase 3, you get to buy perks and upgrades to become more powerful in future rounds. You begin the game with a little garden and 2 plots, where you'll grow your pea plants. You're trying to confirm that certain parent plants will give rise to different traits in their baby plants across 4 different categories: smooth or wrinkly peas, white or purple flowers, green or yellow pods, and tall or short stalks. The traits are all represented on these matrices called Punnett squares, which are named after famed scientist William Joseph Squares. In the second phase of each round, you'll take turns drafting these dice that represent traits that the baby pea plants have. Homozygous dominant traits, or big letter, heterozygous dominant traits, or big letter, and homozygous recessive traits, little letter. You don't have to know anything about Mendelian genetics in order to play or enjoy this game. Lord knows I didn't. But if you're coming at it like me without having taken grade 10 biology, the game will definitely teach you a few new things. So when you take those dice representing certain traits, they let you place little leaf icons on the matching traits on your plants. Your goal is to mark off all of the traits so that you can eventually score the plant, and the points that a plant is worth are up here. I'll go into more detail about how the dice drafting phase works in a second. Genotype is a worker placement game. You have a few spade tokens that represent your ability to do work, and there are different spade-shaped spots on your player board and on the common board, where you can place your spades to do that work. The spots are all exclusive. Once someone has placed a spade there to do that thing, no one else can. Some types of work accommodate multiple spades, but they cost more money for latecomers. And they may only be available at certain player counts. Phase 1. Working. So the game has you placing your spades to do different things, which mostly sets you up for success in the upcoming dice draft. You take turns placing your workers in turn order, starting with the first player and going clockwise. Let's take a look at what each worker placement slot can do. These first shift spots are all about getting first crack at the dice during the drafting phase. If you place here, you'll be the first to choose from the red dice pool. If you place here, you'll get first choice of the yellows, and so on. If you take a first shift space, you also get to take the coin above it, if no one has taken it by grabbing one of these gene flag spaces first. The second shift spots down here fill up from right to left. In the drafting phase, once everyone in the first shift spots picks their dice, everyone in the second shift gets to pick dice from any of the 4 pools. That's the difference between first and second shift. In first shift, you get first choice, but only first choice of a die from that particular pool. In the second shift, you get priority pick of a die from anywhere, but you won't necessarily be the first to pick from that pool. Place here or here to get 2 coins. You can spend your coins in Phase 3 on different upgrades. These 2 spots at the university let you immediately validate a single trait on any of your growing pea plants. This spot costs 1 coin and this spot costs 2. You pick a trait, and place a leaf token on it to validate it. Down here at the nursery, you can take one of these slots to claim a pea plant card. You can take any 2 cards from this row, or from the face-down deck, into your hand. The row does not refill. These are all the plants that are available for this round. So in a 4+ player game with only 5 cards, it's entirely possible that when it's your turn to take a card, there aren't enough, and you'll have to draw 1 or more mystery cards from the face-down deck. Likewise, down here, you can place a spade to take 1 tool card, either face up or face down. The tool card goes in your hand. I'll go over what each of the tool cards does later, but they're all super useful. You also have these 3 worker placement spots on your player board. The most important is this gardening spot. Place a spade here to take a pea plant card or a tool card, and then harvest any of your plants that have all their traits validated to score those cards. And finally, plant as many cards from your hand as you have available plots. You begin the game with 2 plots and 1 plant, with another plant and a tool card in your hand. So this isn't the most beneficial spot to take in round 1. The most it'll let you do is get another tool or pea plant card and plant a card from your hand. But you likely won't be able to score a card because you haven't been able to validate many or any traits at this point. But later in the game, the gardening action is crucial. These 2 spots open up extra dice slots that you can use in the plant breeding phase. You only have 3 dice slots to begin with, which means you'll only be able to draft 3 dice at a maximum. That means that the best case scenario, you'll be able to validate 3 traits on your plants during the draft. So opening up more slots potentially means taking more dice and validating more traits. I say potentially because the plant breeding phase does involve dice rolling. That, in combination with the fact that people get different picks at different times depending on where they place their spades, means that validating traits isn't a sure thing. People may snatch the dice you need out from under you, or those dice might not even get rolled. There are 2 more types of worker placement slots we haven't learned about, but to explain them, I need to give you a bit of a preview of how the dice work in the next phase. In the plant breeding phase, you and the other players chip in to roll all of the dice in the different categories, and sort them according to the values on the Punnett squares. So if you roll a 1 for the seed shape trait, you look for 1 on the table. It's at the intersection of big R and big R, the homozygous dominant trait. So you put the die here in the big R section. Rolling a 2 or 3 will get you the heterozygous dominant trait, or big R little r. So there are 2 chances to roll one of those. And there's only 1 shot at rolling the homozygous recessive trait, little r, by rolling a 4. In the working phase, if you want to make it more likely that the trait you're trying to validate gets rolled, you can take an action to mess around with the parent plant's genes on the Punnett squares. Each Punnett square has a worker placement action in the top left corner. Place your spade there to take the coin next to the square if a first shifter hasn't already grabbed it, and then choose one of these double-sided flags to genetically modify the parent plant and replace either the X or Y axis with dominant or recessive alleles. So if you did this, that means that a roll of 1 or 3 represents the heterozygous dominant trait big R little r, and a roll of 2 or 4 represents the homozygous recessive trait little r. So the odds of getting big R little r have remained the same, the odds of getting little r have doubled, and the odds of getting big R are now zilch. You're essentially sabotaging the monastery's gardens and everyone else's research by pulling up any plants that aren't going to give you the results you want. This could be good for you, or bad for your opponents, or, ideally, both. When you take one of these spots, you can either add a parent gene flag to a Punnett square, remove a parent gene flag from the Punnett square, or keep everything the same and essentially prevent anyone else from messing with it. But you can't place here and flip a flag to its opposite side. Finally, the last spot you can take during the working phase is down here to set a research goal. Pay 2 coins if you go here, or 3 coins if you go here, to mark off one of these 8 research goals with a marker in your color. The research goals are first come, first served, and they earn you a bonus at the end of the game for any matching traits you've validated on your harvested pea plants. So if you set this research goal, then at the end of the game, all your harvested plants with either big G or big G little g traits earn you an extra 2 points. Setting a research goal for the rarer homozygous recessive traits gets you an extra 3 points for each match. So place here, and all of your harvested plants with little t traits on them earn you an extra 3 points. When everyone is out of workers, you move on to the next phase. Phase 2, breeding. In Phase 2, as we've seen, everyone chucks a handful of offspring dice, and you cooperate to line them all up according to the parent genes on the Punnett squares for each category. If you roll any mutation symbols, you re-roll those dice. And if they still come up with mutation symbols on them, you place those dice in the de novo mutation slots. We'll talk about mutations in a sec. Then you start with the first category, P wrinkliness. If someone took the first shift during the worker phase, that player gets to take 1 die from the pool and place it on an empty die slot on his or her player board, and validate the trait that that die represents. So check it out. This blue 3 die maps onto the heterozygous dominant trait big R little r. So by taking it, the orange player gets to mark off the big R little r trait on this pea plant. If you can't use a die to validate a trait, you can't take the die. If you're out of dice slots, you can't take the die. And generally, if you have no traits left to validate, you're out of this phase. But those mutation dice give you a little wiggle room, as you'll see in a sec. Then you bomb down the other categories, and any player who took first shift in each one gets first pick from those categories. When you reach second shift, you go in order from right to left. Second shift players get to draft a die from any category. When all of the second shifters have taken a die, priority goes to the starting player, the one with the giant start player spade, and you continue drafting dice in clockwise order until nobody can do anything else. Now, those de novo mutation dice represent freaky new traits that nobody expected, like peas with curly hair that are actually good at sports. If you take a mutation die, you have 2 options. You can just grab one, put it in an empty slot, and take a coin. Well, that's a good option if you're really hard up for cash, or if you're sitting there with all of your traits already validated. Or you can grab one, put it in an empty slot, and then grab any die of the same color and put it in a second empty slot to validate any trait on one of your plants, as long as that trait is within the same color group. So here, there are no available dice that represent the dominant purple flower trait, but you could take a mutation die and one of these recessive dice and mark off your homozygous dominant trait anyway, because that second die is now wild. The drawback to this, of course, is that you've filled up 2 of your dice slots instead of 1, and your slots are limited. If you take a mutation die, you are allowed to take a second mutation die to use as a wild trait. If you manage to validate all of the traits on a plant during this phase, you don't get to score the plant and clear out the plot. Remember, that only happens when you take the gardening action during the working phase. When everyone has taken all of the dice that they're able to in turn order, starting from the first player, you move on to the third and final phase. Phase 3, Research Upgrade. In Phase 3, you get to spend your hard-earned florins on some perks to make you more powerful in future rounds. This is a list of the upgrades you can buy, and the cost of each upgrade is marked by the bead on the abacus. So $2, $2, $3, and $2. These costs fluctuate. They go up whenever somebody buys a certain perk, and all perks go down $1 at the end of the phase. Because the starting player is in such a strong position, getting first pick of the worker placement spots and first pick of the dice in the dice draft during the third shift, this is sort of an opportunity for the other players to play catch up. That's why the first player who gets to buy a research upgrade is the last player in turn order, and then you go counterclockwise until you get back and reach the first player who gets to choose last. So, what can you buy? Here, you can get a new plot for your garden so you can plant more peas. You put the plot next to your board. Likewise, you can buy an extra slot to hold more dice during the breeding phase. For a little extra money, you can gain another spade to use in the working phase. You max out at 5 spades. And here, you can hire an assistant who will give you a powerful perk for the rest of the game. Like the tool cards, I'll go over the assistants in a separate section. Each time someone buys an upgrade, the abacus marker moves up 1, making that upgrade more expensive for the other players. If it's your turn to buy and you either can't afford something or you want to save your money for a little bit later, you can pass, but that counts you out of the research upgrade phase. And then it just keeps going around counterclockwise, round and round, until everybody passes. So you can buy multiple upgrades in this phase if you can afford them. Reset. When the research upgrade phase ends, there's a little cleanup to do. Move the round tracker up 1 space, reduce the cost of all the research upgrades by 1, Discard the remaining assistants, tools, and P plants, and deal out new cards depending on your player count, but always 3 assistants no matter how many players you have. Make sure each Punnett square has 1 coin next to it. Retrieve all your spades, and set all the offspring dice aside. The research markers stay there, and the parent gene flags do too. Don't touch your P plant or trait markers, and don't do anything to the upgrades you've purchased. You have those for the rest of the game. Then you pass the start player marker to the next player going clockwise, and you begin the working phase of the next round. Tool cards. The tool cards you gain stay in your hand until you want to use them, and then they get discarded after you use them. Half of the tool cards are designed to be used during your turn in the working phase, and the other half when you meet specific conditions. Those tools have a little black arrow on them. There are just a handful of tool cards in the game, so it's worth spending the time to see what each one does. The seed bag lets you draw 5 P plant cards, keep 2, and chuck the rest. You have to play the watering funnel card as soon as you get it. It lets you immediately validate a trait on one of your plants, so it works the same way as these worker placement slots, except you don't have to spend a worker or any money to validate a trait. The dissertation lets you pay 1 coin to set a research goal. That's really powerful. Not only do you get a discount, but you don't have to use a worker. And you can use it to set a research goal even if both of these spaces are full. The flower pot works like an extra plot, but it automatically comes with a new P plant. Grab either a face-up or face-down one. But as soon as you validate all of that plant's traits and harvest it by taking the gardening action, the flower pot gets discarded. Play the graft knife during the draft when you take an offspring die. It's like a double whammy of an extra turn and an extra slot. You use it to grab another offspring die from anywhere on the board, and that die goes onto your graft knife card instead of taking up one of your precious dice slots. You can even use that graft knife to grab a mutation die. Use the rake to treat any die as if it were wild, so you can use it to validate any trait in the same color. You can use the pollen brush whenever you validate a trait to validate matching traits across all your P plants. So if you had 3 P plants with the heterozygous green pod trait Big G Little g, you could use the pollen brush to validate all 3 traits in one shot. Play these cards when you take the parent gene, first shift, or second shift worker placement slots to gain an extra 2 florins. And finally, the grant discounts the cost of a research upgrade by $2. Assistants. You can hire assistants during the research upgrade phase to unlock superpowers that'll help you catch up to whoever's winning. The assistants stay with you for the rest of the game. Like the tools, there are just a handful of assistants, so let's take a look at what each one does. When you take the gardening action with Brother Alypius by your side, you get to draw an extra tool or P plant card, face up or face down. Father Omari gives you an extra worker placement space. During the working phase, place a spade here to roll 1 offspring die of each color. Re-roll if you get a mutation. Then place those dice in the right spot in each category according to the Punnett squares. For each die, you get to mark off a trait on one of your P plants if it matches. Then clear out the dice. Father Anton lets you skip the queue in the second shift. You're always the first player in the second shift line, even if you haven't placed a worker placement marker there. Brother Franz gets you 2 extra dice slots, but you gotta pay $1 if you want to use them. It's $1 to unlock both slots at the same time, and you have to pay for them every round you want to use them. Brother Leopold is good at haggling. He reduces the cost of anything you buy for the rest of the game by 1 florin. But even with his help, you can never pay less than a single florin for something. Sister May is like a human pollen brush. She lets you perform the pollen brush power whenever you validate a trait. So you validate all matching traits across all your plants. Brother Edward works like the flower pot tool. Grab an up or down card and plant it on Brother Edward's face. But the difference is that after you harvest Brother Edward's plant, instead of discarding him, you grab another P plant card. So he's a perpetually refilling extra plot. These 3 assistants have this little tourney icon on them. That means you can only use them once per round, and you turn them to remember that you've used them. Sister Anna lets you pay a coin to validate any trait. During the working phase, Sister Elizabeth lets you validate a trait matching one of your research markers. So if you've got a research marker on little g, turn Sister Elizabeth to validate the matching trait on this plant. And finally, Turn Sister Maria when you take an offspring die during the breeding phase to use the die you took as a wild die to validate any trait of that color. So she's like a human rake. But don't call her rakish. She's a woman of the cloth, for heaven's sake. Endgame. After the final plant breeding phase in round 5, you skip the research upgrade phase and end the game. You get to harvest any of your completed plants and add them to your other harvested cards. Then you flip those completed cards and tally up the points you earned for them. Add up the points you earned for any matching traits that you achieved a research goal for. Each confirmed trait on an incomplete plant is worth 1 point, and each leftover coin is worth a point. Whoever has the most points wins, and in the case of a tie, whoever has the most completed pea plants wins. And if there's still a tie, all tied players share in the victory. Setup. To set up the game, put the common board in the middle of the table and pop a coin on each of the 4 Punnett squares. Put 4 abacus beads on the dark starting spaces. Shuffle the plant and tool cards and deal out a different number depending on player count. 5 cards each in a 4 to 5 player game, 4 cards each for 3 players, or 3 cards each for a 1 or 2 player game. Turn up 3 assistants to hire in the research upgrade phase. Everyone takes a player mat and 3 spade-shaped player markers in a single color and 3 research markers. Pile up the remaining player markers here. You'll have to buy them during the research upgrade phase if you want them. Everyone gets 1 coin and 3 plant cards and 1 tool card. You keep 1 plant card, plant 1 plant card, and discard the 3rd plant card. So it's a little like a game of pollinate, marry, kill right off the bat. Put the offspring dice, gene tiles, coins, trait markers, extra plots, and extra slots within reach of the player with the shortest arms. Stupid genetics. The start player marker goes to the player who most recently did any gardening. Pop the round tracker on round 1 to start the game. And now you're ready to play Genotype, a Mendelian genetics game.
Thanks, Ryan. I think we've got it. And if you folks would like to learn a little bit more about this game, you can follow the links that are on the screen right now or down in the show notes in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.